manner 24/7, 365 or 366, and welcome to our usual Sunday live stream a couple hours earlier than we normally do. Normally we're live at noon Mountain Time. Normally we're live at 2 o'clock Mountain Time, but we're going live today at noon Mountain Time. And we will be going for an hour or so, as I will be giving you a fun live stream lecture, obviously with 4th of July just passing, and with a video I just released. I release full-length videos every Friday and Monday at 8 p.m. Eastern, and with one of them being my video where I explain the history and read the Declaration of Independence. Please go check that out. I would like to present to you a live stream about the American Revolutionary Experiment and about the Founding Fathers and about the Declaration of Independence in particular. So I will be discussing the root causes of the American Revolution. I've done this before on a live stream lecture, but I'm going to go into deep detail about the creation of the founding documents of the United States and talk a little bit about the Revolutionary War and how the United States wouldn't have been able to actually get their independence had they not actually fought a war, and that the words of the Declaration of Independence were actually a death sentence for our founding fathers until they finally won at Yorktown on October 19th, 1781, thanks to this guy, George Washington. So I hope you enjoyed the background. If you like history and social studies, consider liking and subscribing. Join us for the vibes and all of that good stuff. We have Instagram, X, Facebook. We went live on Instagram yesterday, and we'll be going live on Instagram every Friday at 7 p.m. Eastern for an hour of Q&A. We do Q&As and Ask Me Anythings every Friday and Saturday, and at 6 p.m. Eastern. And then at some point this week, I'm going to surprise everybody by going live on TikTok. I don't know exactly how that's going to work, but I'm really looking forward to it. We are also setting up a Discord, so please follow me on the TikTok. Hars, if you could put the TikTok in the chat, that would be really helpful. And yeah, all of that great stuff. In fact, the TikTok is Friendly History, and I'll put that up at the very end as my background. But for now, for the next, I don't know if it's going to take a full hour or whatever time's left over, we'll do a little bit of Q&A. We do Q&As every Friday and Saturday at 6, so join us here. And then 7 o'clock on Instagram on Fridays, join us there as well. That's all Eastern Standard Time, by the way. And yeah, Steve, Gayahan, Hars, good to see you. Hars, I thought you were following me on TikTok. It's Friendly History. It's the same as my Substack. I also have a Patreon. There's my X. There's Instagram. There's a bunch of different ways to follow me. And what we are doing here at the channel, we're doing a lot of fun and interesting stuff this summer that I really hope you can join us for. And soon we'll have a Discord. Soon there'll be live streams there. I'm really, really looking forward to it. So, Ryan, great to see you. Long time. And by the way, Ryan, my master's thesis is now available on the Substack. So if you go to Substack, you can find my master's thesis and read it. But yes, welcome to the Friendly Neighborhood History channel, where we bring you history in a friendly, neighborly manner, 24/7, 365, or 366. If you like that sort of thing, if you enjoy the vibes, if you like the background, or if you're enjoying if you enjoy what you listen to in the next couple of minutes, please consider liking and subscribing. This is our live stream lec. We do this every Sunday, usually at 4 Eastern, but today we're going a little early, and I am presenting on the Founding Fathers and the Declaration of Independence. So, the American, and hello everyone, I'm not going to be interacting with the chat too much, and maybe at the end I will be, and catching up, and obviously we might have time for a Q&A. We'll see what's happened. And Capon, don't report me yet. Captain Crunch, listen to what I have to say first. I talk about all types of history, and today I'm talking about the United States and its history, Brian, because we are looking at Independence Day that just passed us up. So, I'm going to go down the list, but I'm going to try to focus specifically on the Declaration of Independence. The American Revolutionary Movement doesn't start in 1775 or 1776. By 1776, when these guys are writing and signing the Declaration of Independence, the United States has already been working on its Revolutionary War for over a year. George Washington is in the field trying to defend New York from the British, a campaign in which he will desperately fail and will almost destroy the Revolutionary War effort. The Founding Fathers are already being lined up. You've got Ben Franklin, Thomas Jefferson, John Adams, and George Washington. They are all doing their thing. We don't have Hamilton quite yet in the mix. We don't have, not Aaron Burr. No, not Aaron Burr. We don't have Hamilton or Madison in the mix. They're kind of on the younger side, but they're going to come to fruition later on. Hamilton is fighting in the war. I think Madison was in the Virginia legislature at this time. They'll come up later during the Constitution. But for now, the framework of our nation is starting to be founded. I'm saying "our" because I'm an American, so yeah, it is not pre-recorded. This is all off the top of my head. I have no notes, no nothing. Anyways, so the revolutionary movement for the United States does not start in 1776. It doesn't start in 1775 when the American Revolution actually begins. It doesn't start in 1773 with the Boston Tea Party. It doesn't start in 1770 with the Boston Massacre. It doesn't start in 1765 with the Stamp Act that really begins the protesting, boycotting cycle. It doesn't even start in 1764 in 1763 with the first taxes the colonists don't like. It really starts, I think, in many ways in 17, it could start as early as 1763, maybe even if you want to go all the way back to 1754. In 1754, a contingent of British and American colonials exploring the Western Territories, which was what the Ohio River Valley, which would be states like Ohio, Illinois, the Midwest, basically. They were investigating these areas, worried about the French and their Native American allies. They were ambushed and attacked. I think actually was in Pennsylvania. They were attacked. It might have been Pennsylvania or Ohio. I always forget which one. They were ambushed by a group of Native Americans who were loyal to the French. The French had developed really good relationships with the Native Americans over the last century since they had started colonizing Canada and areas in the United States. So the French had good connections with the Native Americans, and the Native Americans were working with them in order to fight against British influence, which was spreading west, more and more west. As the colonies went more and more west, they gained more land in what is now Virginia and Pennsylvania, and we're starting to push into towards the Appalachian area. This really bothered a lot of Native Americans and their French allies who continued to claim these lands. So this land was extremely disputed, as were significant portions of Canada to the north. The British general, I believe his name is Braddock, was ambushed. He was killed, and his young lieutenant colonel American commander, a man named George Washington, had to basically rally the troops and retreat out of that area. And this starts what's known as the French-Indian War. 2 years later, fighting will break out on the European continent that is commensurate with this. And this is the American phase of what's a greater war called the 7 Years' War, which I happen to believe, if you've been on this channel for any number of months or whatever, that for 7 Years' War is the First World War. There's fighting in India, there's fighting in Europe, the Russians, the Prussians, the Austrians, the French, and the British are all fighting all over the place. The Portuguese and Spanish will join and fight in Central and South America later on. There's fighting in West Africa between the British and the French. The Indian subcontinent is drawn into it. And of course, the Native Americans here most of them are helping the French, like the Huron and the Ottawa tribes. But the Iroquois, best known for the Mohawk Indians with the Mohawk design and the tomahawks, join sides with the British. So the British do have some of their own Indian allies, the French have some of their own Indian allies, and the American colonials are, of course, helping the British who started them. And for 9 years, fighting continues in what's known as the French-Indian War from 1754 to 1763. Eventually, the French are defeated as the British are able to sail up the Lawrence River. They're able to they're able to take over Montreal and eventually even Toronto. And as time goes on, despite the heavy Native American presence, the British Army is just more disciplined, more trained, and has more men. And with the help of the Americans, they're able to defeat a lot of the different Native American tribes and the French forces. The French are bankrupted and devastated by this war, and they will remember this and get really, really frustrated because by 1763, they've lost most of their lands in North America, almost all of their lands in India, and have been embarrassed on the continent as well by the British. So the British win this war in wonderful fashion. They take over huge sections of Canada. They get the Ohio River Valley, which includes those Midwestern territories, including the Cumberland Gap and the Appalachian Trail, which will be plotted by Daniel Boone. The British promised this area to the Native Americans, saying that the colonists won't go into that area, but the incursions into this will lead to greater tensions between the British and the Americans, and of course between the Americans and the American Indians. As people like Daniel Boone and other trailblazers start moving into Kentucky and Tennessee and areas like that, as that entire Ohio River Valley and Ohio Territory becomes disputed and will eventually be given to the Americans after they win the Revolution in 1783. So the Western Territory, the Western frontier, was places like Michigan and Wisconsin and Indiana in the late 18th century for the United States. So there is no United States, however. There are 13 British colonies. Many of them do not have their full form, like Virginia and Pennsylvania and North Carolina and Georgia do not have a full form of what those states look like today. Their shapes are not, their amount of land is smaller. Virginia and Pennsylvania's borders have been pushed to the east. At this time, Massachusetts controls Maine and large sections of Vermont. Later, New Hampshire will control Vermont. So Vermont is not its own area yet. The 13 colonies are, I did an entire live stream lecture on how they were formed. The 13 colonies are, of course, New Hampshire, Massachusetts, Connecticut, Rhode Island, Pennsylvania, Delaware, New Jersey, New York, North and South Carolina, Virginia, Georgia, and Maryland. I think I mentioned all of them. So anyways, that's what else helps, what happens next. So the British have won this war. They've won large sections of Canada. They've won more land in India. They have a huge amount of influence. The British East India Company will monitor most of their lands in India. And the American colonists were protected by the British, and many of them fought and died and suffered for the British. And by the way, this is where George Washington becomes the skilled commander that he is. He learns British military tactics, and this will help him during the American Revolution over a decade later. But Washington only wants to be a surveyor and a farmer and go and live on his plantation, which basically is his home, his estate. He has a bunch of slaves from his wife, Martha, at Mount Vernon. And so he wants to live on Mount Vernon and kind of enjoy his life, and that's what he's going to do during the 1760s. He's going to stay out of the political debate. Benjamin Franklin, by the way, at this time is living in England. He becomes a delegate and almost like the ambassador of the colonies to Great Britain. He loves living in London. He loves the nightlife. He loves working with parliamentarians. He's an extremely well-read, intellectual, and intelligent individual. He's a self-made man. He's basically the first American celebrity. He raised himself up from poverty to become famous for his Poor Richard's Almanac and become a famous scientist and inventor. Bifocals, of course. And so he's got a lot of sway and cultural influence in the colonies, and so he's an ambassador and a delegate to Britain, and he loves living in London, and he loves the British ladies, by the way, who are a lot younger than him. He's already in his 60s, late 50s by the time the French-Indian War ends. So the Treaty of Paris, and believe me, there will be more in 1763, gives the British an incentive to control huge amounts of land in what is now the Midwest of the United States and Canada. And of course, the 13 colonies are controlled by the British, and they have always had a kind of a passive relationship with the British. The British have given them what's called salutary neglect. Basically, as long as you pay your taxes and you pay fealty to the King of England, you can do, or Queen, you can do basically what you want as a colony. There are colonies that were established by the Crown directly. There are colonies where the king appoints the governor. There are colonies where there are elected officials. There are colonies that were founded by companies like Jamestown and Virginia were founded by the Virginia Company. Yeah, I know, really original naming, but it was called Virginia because of Elizabeth I being a virgin queen. The Carolinas are named after King Charles. Maryland is named after his mother, Henrietta Maria. Georgia is named after the Georgian kings. It's established as a debtors' colony. I've talked about this before on the channel. But yeah, you've got different colonies established for different reasons. And of course, areas like Jersey, York, and Hampshire are all in England, so they get the new title. And the area of the northeastern colonies settled by the Puritans in the 1620s is the New England. So there you go. A little bit of etymology and word origin there for you about the American states and colonies. So the colonies have always kind of operated under salutary neglect. As long as they pay their taxes and pay fealty and fight in the British wars, the British basically allow them to govern themselves and live on their own and expand on their own and grow their own businesses. The British are going to start interfering with that a little bit, and this is going to cause a lot of backlash. The reason the British do this is simple. They have paid a lot of money and suffered a lot fighting in the colonies and all over the world in order to defeat the French and keep their colonies secure. So they believe it is perfectly fair for them to raise levies and taxes on the colonies. The first they first say that the Western territory should not be colonized by the Americans, and a lot of American explorers and frontiersmen don't like this. So this is the first sign. But really, 1763 to 1765, everybody's pretty happy being with the British. In fact, even into the American Revolution, there's going to be a significant amount of American people who really are okay with being British, and there's going to be people who are so loyal to the British, they will fight for the British in the American Revolution. They're called Tories or Loyalists. Tories is a nickname for the British conservatives who support the crown. So the Tories are loyalists, and the moderates will kind of be okay with the British, and the overwhelming majority of Americans love being part of the British, and very few, if any, have any idea of creating a revolutionary movement even as late as the mid-1760s. The first domino to really fall, however, that alienates the colonies is the Stamp Act of 1765. The Stamp Act is a very small increase of taxes, especially compared to the taxes levied by the British on their Indian and Canadian and British subjects, that basically taxes paper goods. You have to get a particular tax stamp on it, and The colonists don't like this. The reason a lot of them don't like this, some of them are okay with it, but a lot of them don't like it. It's a small levy. It's not because it's exorbitantly expensive or they're poor. It's because the Indians are far poorer than they are. It's because they are generally generally opposed to being taxed directly by the British. They've never really been taxed directly by the British. A portion of their taxes, depending on which colony you're talking about, would go to their government, and a portion of the taxes from that were taxed would go to the British. So their taxes would go to their local governments, their colonial governments, and a portion of those taxes would go back to England. That's how the relationship had always worked. The colonists were able to elect their own elected officials, the House of Burgesses in Virginia, the Assembly in Massachusetts. It made a lot of sense. And I'm going to be mentioning Virginia and Massachusetts a lot because these two are kind of where a lot of things happen. Most of the significant founding fathers are from Virginia: Jefferson, Madison, and Washington. Other great founding fathers like John and Samuel Adams are from Massachusetts. Ben Franklin's from Philadelphia, by the way, or Pennsylvania, but Philadelphia. So there's a lot of tension, or there's a lot of issue with the British directly taxing the colonists because they've never done this before. This seems like a violation of salutary neglect. And the colonists believe that they are not being represented in Parliament, so Parliament cannot do this. So they boycott. A lot of them arrest and tar and feather, where they burn people, they pour pitch and tar over people and then stick feathers on them, either people who would pay the taxes or tax enforcers or tax collectors. They smuggle paper goods from other areas. A lot of them are going to show they're not going to pay these taxes because of they're not being directly represented in the British government. This creates a cycle that's going to last for the next 10 years, where the British put in a tax on something, the American colonists boycott it, a lot of them, not all of them, but a lot of them. They reject the taxes, they hate them, they create a boycott, and the British eventually realize that it's not worth it, and both sides go away feeling more disconnected and more upset with the other. This happened several times. The first of the 1765 Stamp Act. The Sugar Act is actually the first one in 1764, but that one doesn't get the attention. The Stamp Act is the real first violation that the Americans really don't like. Then the British repeal it after the large boycotts. The tensions are growing, and there's groups of people who are becoming more and more tired of the British imposing taxes. One particularly militant group will become known as the Sons of Liberty, started by men like Samuel Adams and a silversmith named Paul Revere. They will be the heart and soul of Massachusetts and Boston rebellion against the British, as Massachusetts will become a hub for resistance, although other colonies are resistant. New England and the middle colonies tend to be pretty resistant, while southern colonies tend to be more loyal to the crown, except Virginia, which has produced its fair share of rebels like George Mason, Thomas Jefferson, and Patrick Henry. What happens next? Well, the next series of taxes is the Townshend Act in 1767, which basically says the colonies are forced to pay taxes on lead and glass and all sorts of different imports and tea, and this is going to be the big one. The Americans boycott this one, and the British repeal all of these taxes except for the one on tea. They even make a new law called the Tea Act that forces the Americans to pay for the tea. The Americans aren't going to do this. They're not again, the cycle continues and it's only getting worse and worse. The British are getting more and more frustrated with this, and so they start stationing soldiers in the colonies to keep order. There had always been a presence of British soldiers, but an increased presence causes tension. And in 1770 in Boston, as British soldiers clash with colonials, and 5 people are shot and killed. This is called by the colonies, this is called by the British a tragedy, and by the colonials, it's called the Boston Massacre. It's highly exaggerated in its brutality in a famous painting and engraving by none other than Paul Revere himself. The Tea Act of 1773 makes it clear that the British are not messing around, and they're going to attempt to force the Americans to pay these taxes on tea. A bunch of Americans dress up as Indians and go on to British ships and throw out the tea. This is the Boston Tea Party of December of 1773. The coercive or intolerable acts and the quartering acts force Americans to locks down. Boston Harbor is locked down eventually. but it tries to force the Americans to pay the taxes. It gets rid of smuggling. It closes down harbors. It forces Americans to house British soldiers, which is why the Third Amendment to the Constitution says, although no one has ever talked about it like they do the First, Second, or Ninth, 10th, Fifth Amendment, no one has ever talked about how the Third Amendment bans the government from actually putting soldiers in your house, because the British did this in 1773 and 1774, especially in Massachusetts. The Sons of Liberty start gathering weapons. There in 1774, 1775, the First Continental Congress gets together to try to decide what they can do. They encourage the continual rejection of paying British taxes, and they try to make some sort of agreement with the British so that this will not continue. Everything doesn't really work. This doesn't really go anywhere. It doesn't really work, and tensions continue to build. In 1775, the British, Boston is the hotbed of revolutionary activity, and there's also thousands of British soldiers. The colonial governor has been replaced with one who is completely sympathetic to the British, and we have the rumblings of a rebellion going on. Now, again, throughout most of the war, it's going to be a third. About 33 to 40% of people will support the revolutionary cause. About a third of people will be okay with it and just kind of see how this plays out. And the rest will be loyal, about 25% will be loyal to the British Crown. Some of them will even fight for the British Crown, particularly in southern colonies like North and South Carolina and Georgia. On April 18th, 1775, the British land a bunch of soldiers coming both by land and by sea. This triggers Paul Revere and other writers to go out and warn local colonial rebels, known as patriots, to gather their weapons. These men are known for being militiamen. They are not trained fighters. Some of them have never seen military action at all. Most of them are used to just hunting and fishing when they use weaponry, but they are completely frustrated with British taxes, and they are ready to fight at the drop of a hat. Their ability to be prepared in an era when guns took forever to load, like muskets, they really didn't have rifles like we do nowadays, or even during the Civil War. Their ability to be prepared very quickly makes them called the Minutemen. So a group of Minutemen and a bunch of other colonials trying to protect their weapons and munitions from the British, who were sending soldiers to seize them and arrest several leaders of the Patriots, meet at a field in Lexington on April 19th, and they square off against each other, and nobody knows exactly who fired the first shot, but it's called the shot heard round the world, and this is what starts the American Revolution. The British win the first conflict at Lexington, but then are humiliated at the Battle of Concord later that day, as they are basically attacked by a bunch of American soldiers from behind trees and hiding in places. Guerrilla war tactics in both the northern and southern colonies will be how the Americans eventually win this war. Washington's ability to evade the British and go around their lines and keep them chasing his tail throughout 1776, 1777, and 1778 will eventually lead to a stalemate in the northern colonies. The southern colonies, men like Francis Marion, Daniel Morgan, those are the two generals. And eventually Nathaniel Greene will organize them into a regular army, but their guerrilla tactics will continue to undermine the British effort to control that area. And by the way, the movie Patriot, if any of you like that movie, is about the American Revolution in the South. It's not a hugely accurate movie, but you've got characters from history that are transplanted there, like Cornwallis, Nathaniel Greene, and Banastre Tarleton, who was the British cavalryman known for his brutality and dressing really nice. So what happens next? Okay, so hope you're all enjoying it. If you are, consider liking and subscribing. The Second Continental Congress meets in 1775 after the war, right after the war starts. The first major battle of the war will be at Bunker Hill, right outside of Boston, and the Americans will be defeated, but their willingness to continue fighting will prove significant. Eventually, they will capture cannons from Fort Ticonderoga in New York, bring them down to Boston, and basically the British will have to abandon Boston, and Washington takes command of the American army on July 3rd, 1775. And he's going to spend most of 1775, 1776 organizing them. Washington doesn't have as much military experience as many of the British generals like William Howe or Henry Clinton. but he is a experienced general and an experienced commander, and he does a bang-up job of bringing them to the victory line. Now, I've often said on this channel, but I don't think that George Washington was a remarkable general. He was a good general, and he compared to his contemporaries, and obviously his ability to evade the British Army at several instances, and to be able to win several important skirmishes and to hold them off on several important battles like Monmouth, shows that he was actually quite an impressive leader and is a pretty good general for the most part. And of course, eventually he will figure out that the best thing to do is to trap the British, and this is what he'll do at Yorktown. So yeah, what happens next? Well, the Second Continental Congress wants to talk. They don't want this war to spiral out of control. You already have American rebels, all of whom will be either killed in combat and their leaders will be hung as treasonous rebels. The Continental Congress is already risking this themselves. Ben Franklin comes back from England. He's very upset about leaving there. You have a rise of some important figures. John Adams defended the soldiers in the Boston Massacre, believing very strongly in the rule by law and trial by jury, which is something the colonists think the British have violated, and he is showing that the Americans can do it better than the British can. And I'm saying Americans generically to refer to people of the United States. I am not talking about Canadians and Mexicans and Central and South Americans, obviously, or the people of the Caribbean. So you have the rise of men like John Adams. You have other important figures. Oh, by the way, an important pamphlet, as many Americans are leery about joining the Revolutionary War, an important pamphlet called Common Sense goes out. Thomas Paine, who is not an American, I forget where he's actually from. I think he might be from Jamaica, but he's white, he's a European. He might have been from Britain too. He becomes a famous printer, and he prints the famous Common Sense, in which he encourages the Americans to rebel, saying that they are ruled by a tyrant, they are being taxed too much, and they need to fight back against this and do what Bermuda is controlled by the British to this day, by the way. Sorry, I'm just looking at the chat real fast. He encourages the Americans to rebel and join the as many Americans as possible to join the revolutionary cause, that their cause is just and understandable, and it's the right thing for them to do. So what happens next? They send out a petition to the British government for peace. But the peace requires the end of taxation, the opening of Boston Harbor, the removal of British troops, and other things. This is called the Olive Branch Petition. King George, who is responsible for this part, as Parliament. Parliament has been passing the laws, but King George has been behind them every step of the way. They basically say nuts to that. That's a terrible idea. They're not going anywhere with that. And their lack of response, their refusal to the Olive Branch Petition, makes the American Founding Fathers realize that this war is going to last a while, and the revolutionary cause is either going to go all in or it's not going to happen at all. And since fighting has already begun, the Americans need to be able to justify their reasoning for fighting against the British. All during this time, they're also trying to impress the French and the Spanish, who would be interested in undermining the British, to join their side. France and Spain are interested in this, France in particular, to get revenge against the British. But the problem is that the French are struggling. They're in the midst of famines and other problems. Their economy is weak, so they really need a good reason to send military support. One young military officer named the Marquis de Lafayette is already on the American side and is already becoming Washington's closest advisor and friend, and mentee. But the French need more encouragement for that. So what happens next? The basic, to be able to make it clear what they are doing and why they're doing it, they draw a line, and this is a very firm line. They decide in June of 1776, they vote on it, and they decide that they need to make a list of grievances against the King of England and to say why they are fighting this revolution and what their end goal is. The war has gone from being a series of skirmishes to being an all-out campaign to stop the British presence in the 13 colonies. So they come up with writing a document, and they wonder who will write it. John Adams, who of course has a lot of stock, his cousin was one of the leaders of the Sons of Liberty, the guys who did the Boston Tea Party, Samuel Adams. John Adams recommends a young Virginian politician with an affinity for philosophy, like that of Locke and Aristotle, Thomas Jefferson. Jefferson is a slave owner from Virginia who believes that all people are created equal and that freedom is the most important thing people can have. He is an Enlightenment thinker, and if you want to learn more about the Enlightenment, go watch my live stream from last week. I believe it was about the Enlightenment, so you will enjoy that. It was about Enlightenment and June holidays, so if you want to learn about Flag Day, you can see the American flag there, or about Juneteenth, the other American Freedom Day, go check that out. But Jefferson, inspired heavily by the French, not by the French Revolution, that's later, inspired heavily by the French elite and French Enlightenment thinkers like Voltaire and Rousseau, believed strongly in the idea of independence, freedom, and the rights to life, liberty, and property. This is the Lockean principle, which is a British philosopher who influenced Britain to become a parliamentary system in the 17th century, more than a monarchy. Jefferson is put in charge of a committee to write the Declaration with 4 other men. Adams is one of them, then Ben Franklin, Roger Sherman, who will become important in the forming of the Constitution, and Robert Livingston. And Jefferson. So you've got these 5 men, and they're going to work for about 2 weeks to write it. And Jefferson finally comes up with a draft. In the draft, he actually not only condemns the British, but he condemns the practice of slavery. He insists that the American colonials free their slaves. This would mean him too. This creates a very hairy and controversial decision in American history that will come back again with the Civil War, as Benjamin Franklin strikes that from the record, believing basically that this would cause America to be dissolved. The Southern colonies are already pretty squishy about their support for the Revolution. If they're told they have to give up their slaves, a lot of the most wealthy Southerners will not support the revolutionary cause, including people who are in the Continental Congress. So the first attempt to give freedom to all men and women, is struck from the record by Benjamin Franklin, and will only appeal to white men at the time. So that is at the very end of the document. The first part of the document, and if you want to hear the document, you can go back and listen to my reading of it from Friday. Eat a hot dog and wave an American flag while you listen to me read it. The first part of the document basically is the preamble. It is explaining the rights that people have. And this includes, obviously, the most famous phrase, maybe in all of American political history. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed with their Creator with certain unalienable rights, which among these include life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That the government gets their right from the consent of the governed. This creates, if you wonder why, if you're a foreigner, if you're not from the United States, if you're just listening and you find American history interesting, if you wonder why America is so far to the right, if you want to call it that, or is so big on liberty and freedom and the government not doing things, and there's this libertarian stream of thought that goes through America that doesn't go through places like France or India or Iraq or areas like that, it's because of those lines. The government derives its power from the consent of the governed, so it is this document, it is this part of a document that says very clearly why America is America in that sense. Now, some people have interpreted this to mean America is an idea. I've never liked that language as a historian. I don't see America as an idea. I see it as an experiment. And that's why an American is anyone who kind of embodies that. And so that's why you don't have an ethnic real makeup of America based on a particular ethnicity like England, France, Germany, or Turkey. So so if you wonder why America has such an anti-governmental spin compared to Europe or other places, it's partly because of the Declaration of Independence. It's partly because of the no taxation without representation argument made against the British taxing them in the 1760s, and it's the consent of the governed and life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Now, life, liberty, and property were Locke's principles, that basically every human being has these rights and God gives them these rights. The pursuit of happiness comes from Aristotle. Happiness is not joy, not fully. It's virtue. It's the good life. It's bon vivance. It's living well. It's doing the right thing. And everyone has the right to do this, according to Jefferson and the earliest founding fathers. So this is so that's the first part of the document. The second part of the document is actually the juicy part at first. It is the indictments on the king. He has done this, and it's basically he has arrested us without trial. He has taxed us without representation. It basically lists a list of complaints that have gone back for the last decade, saying what the British have done to ruin America, to ruin their colonies, and to become tyrannical. And therefore, because of that second part, the third part becomes because he has done all of these things, we, the independent, and they call themselves this at the beginning of the document, the United States of America. I think this is the first time it ever occurs in print. Declare the right to be fully free. And it basically gives this very implied idea that while the colonies are their own independent entities with their own independent ideas and their own independent people, they are together in this cause. And so this is where the idea of a federalist approach to government really comes from, that these states are on their own, which, by the way, federalism, one way or another, is how the government works in the United States to this day. They are on their own, but they're going to look out for number one, but they're also looking out for all the other colonies and states next to them. So this is where the principles come from. And yes, David, it's "Don't tread on me." I think you're making a pun, but yes, the "Don't tread on me" flag was a flag used by revolutionaries at this time, and it comes from a journal print that shows a political cartoon, but it's really a sketch that shows a snake, and the snake has 13 parts to him, and the 13 parts are the 13 different colonies, and the phrase is "join or die." And the idea is the snake will be dangerous if all the colonies are together, but he will be easily destroyed if he is divided. And united we stand, divided we fall. All of these principles come from this idea: live free or die. The statement from the motto of New Hampshire. It all comes from this moment, more or less. The idea of join or die, don't tread on me, no taxation or representation. All of that is summed up in one way or another in this document. Now, this document means diddly when it is signed. The British don't even learn about it for a month. And here's a quick timeline. June 11th, Jefferson's assigned it. June 27th, he finishes it. And they have it read to the Continental Congress. On July 2nd, the Continental Congress ratifies it, and in kind of a lead up to what we will see in the American system with Congress passing a bill and the president signing it into law, so July 2nd is the ratification. And John Adams, who's up there, says, "This is a glorious day. Let us celebrate with parades, thanksgiving, merriment, music, laughter, and fireworks." And he's referring to July 2nd. So that's why a lot of people will point out, make a point of order, even I've done it on this channel, that July 2nd could have been Independence Day. People have said June 27th. People have said October 19th, when the Americans defeat the British at Yorktown. But a lot of people settle on July 4th, because July 4th is when it actually is enacted, when the president of the Continental Congress, a man named John Hancock, a magnate, a businessman from New York, signs it, and he puts his John Hancock, that very large signature. A month later, they all gather together and sign it again. Now, interestingly enough, the British, because this is the age without televisions and the internet and everything, obviously, the British, you find out through newspapers and through mail, and you can find out overseas months later. The British don't find out about this until August 10th. On July 4th, 1776, George III writes in his diary, "Nothing of great importance happened today." Which is ironic. He doesn't know, so it's not that ironic if you understand history, but it's kind of funny. And then in August, the British find out, and they're not happy about this. Now, each one of these men who signed this document is now like George Washington, who is fighting the British. They are traitors. They are treasonous rebel scum, and they will be killed by the British. They have not signed a real Declaration of Independence. They have made their case clear, but they have also made it clear that every single one of them will be killed when the British win the war. They have no chance unless they somehow pull the inside straight and win the war. And that is hugely hit in August and September, when the British massacre the Americans in New York. Washington is forced to retreat with his tail between his legs, and his army is almost completely destroyed. The Continental Congress, the Second Continental Congress, will continue to administer and govern, but they can't legislate. They can't really print money. Their money doesn't have any value. They can't pay their soldiers, so a lot of the soldiers are threatened to leave. Some of them even do leave. The American cause really, despite the amazing daring boldness of the Declaration of Independence, signed on July 4th, 1776 by John Hancock, the American cause looks pretty broken. This looks just like a death warrant at the end of 1776. All these men are going to hang. And Franklin makes the argument, we will either hang together or we will hang separate. The Declaration of Independence does not win battles. And Washington is at the end of his rope come November, December of 1776. And many of his soldiers are ready to go home, and they don't want to be killed, so they would rather be known as deserters than as traitors who are hung or shot. And Washington makes a promise to his men, and he says, just give me a couple weeks, and I'll get it to you, and I will give you what you need. And we're gonna get a big win. And he does this very daring, and I'm trying to look for the photo, the painting, because you all know the painting, which is obviously, all these paintings are wonderful. And that's Carpenter's Hall, by the way, in Philadelphia, where they sign it, and that becomes Liberty Hall. And there's a bell that's rung out when they sign it, and that is, of course, the Liberty Bell. So there you go. There's a little Americana on the side for you guys. It's all in Philadelphia. They're first governing in Philadelphia. They'll actually have to leave when the British are attacking them, and I can't find the painting in my stuff here. But basically, you all know the painting I'm talking about. Washington crossing the Delaware. He's forced to retreat out of New York, and in a very daring move in the late hours of Christmas Eve, 1776, his forces cross the Delaware River and go into New Jersey. And at New Jersey, they encounter they win two quick battles at Trenton and Newark against the Hessians. The Hessians were German mercenaries hired by the British. The British monarch also controlled the area of Hanover in Germany. And so the Hessians were German mercenaries that the British used in their fighting. I can't find it right now. Oh well. And we'll update and we'll go with this nice painting of the founding fathers doing their thing. So anyways, what happens next? So Washington keeps the American fighting alive, and Benjamin Franklin is sent to France to try to get the French involved in the war. The French are not interested in this unless they can really do some serious harm to the British, by the way. And the only way they can do this is with a solid American victory that backs up the Declaration of Independence. Again, one of the reasons they signed the Declaration of Independence was to get the French and the Spanish interested in helping them fight the war. The Spanish will never really send military aid as much as just money to help them pay their soldiers and buy new weapons and equipment. Remember, the American Continental Army is a ragtag group. There are soldiers who are properly trained, who have experience. Many of the officer corps are men from the French Indian War. Washington was among them. Horatio Gates, men like this. Mad Anthony Wayne. I think that was his name. He was fighting on the frontier. These are men from Daniel Morgan. These are men from the 7 Years' War or the French Indian War who have experience fighting, and they become the leaders of the military. But most of the men fighting are not, although you've seen the blue coats, the Continental uniform with the army, most men are kind of a ragtag militia. And most of them are not trained in proper infantry marches and drills that are common thanks to men like Frederick the Great of Prussia. So the Americans need to learn European fighting tactics, because the walking up and lining up and firing and standing your ground even after several of your men have been hit and killed, that is an issue for the American army, and they're going to get some training about that in the next year. Washington, despite these victories, is consistently forced to retreat in the face of a much larger British army, thanks to the leadership of William Howe. And despite the fact that him and many of the officer corps can get amenities, blankets and food and proper rations, and Washington refuses to allow himself this, with his own men suffering and continually struggling. So that's a huge issue. The Continental Congress is forced out of Philadelphia. The British capture it for a short time. I forget where they go exactly. Between 1777 and 1778, Washington winters in Valley Forge in Pennsylvania, and basically that is when the American cause comes to a breaking point. The men are suffering. A lot of them are in really bad shape, and Washington refuses all of the comforts and luxuries and decides to suffer with his men. He is helped, though, by a Prussian military officer, a man named Baron Friedrich von Steuben. And von Steuben basically comes and is interested in the American cause. And again, the American cause never would have been successful without the help of continental Europe. And Baron von Steuben does his thing by basically teaching proper drilling and military techniques to the American soldiers at Valley Forge. And he whips them into an actual disciplined military fighting force with the help of Washington. And they are actually able to win several convincing battles. I'm trying to remember the one. Was it Monmouth? Monmouth was one of them. And there's another one. And the Americans are able to prove that they can defeat the British, or at least fight to a stalemate in the North. The British realize that the war is just going to continue like this for a while, and the Americans are just going to run around. However, in 1770, I think it's 1778, the Americans get a big help when, what's his name? I think it is Horatio Gates. It's one of them, or Henry Knox. It's either Knox or Gates. I think it's Gates. Horatio Gates wins a huge battle at Saratoga with the help of an American general who will later betray the cause named Benedict Arnold, the same guy who got cannons from Fort Ticonderoga earlier and helped take Boston. This victory at Saratoga in the defeat of the British army of John Burgoyne shows that the Americans not only can evade the British, but they can defeat the British without the help of any Europeans. This is the argument Franklin needs to persuade the French to join the war. The French send military forces and naval forces. They send an incredibly great general named the Comte de Rochambeau, and he is going to help the Americans. Horatio Gates Philip. Yep, there you go. Battle of Saratoga. So thank you, Harst. Henry Knox was the future First Secretary of the War, although he was a Revolutionary War officer, and of course he has Fort Knox named after him. Thank you for the clarification, Harst, my wonderful moderator, who's doing such a great job, and you can follow us on the social medias that I have pinned, that he wrote in the chat. So yeah, anyways. So the British realized that fighting in the North really isn't working. There's a lot of patriots coming out of the woodwork. The French are getting involved in the war, so the war's kind of stymied. So the British are just going to kind of let Henry Clinton wait in New York and Washington run around in Pennsylvania and New Jersey, and he's going to kind of hang out there for a while, and so they're going to redirect their attention to the South. The South is much more sympathetic to the British, and the British are going to win several important victories there. And eventually Washington will send his best general, a man named Nathaniel Greene, to the South to basically do what von Steuben did to his own forces in the North, in the South, and get the people of the South, and get the ragtime forces of Francis Marion and Daniel Morgan to actually form a cohesive army and to win important battles. Guilford Courthouse is one of them. Eventually, the British army in the South, despite the support of the Loyalists, decides to link up with the British Army from New York. Henry Clinton's forces will sail from New York to the Chesapeake Bay, in Virginia, and meet with Lord Charles Cornwallis. This is a perfect time that Washington sees his opportunity. He has Nathaniel Greene chase Cornwallis to Yorktown, and he moves his forces down south where the British are sailing. The British reinforcements are stalled because the French Navy shows up and basically traps Cornwallis at Yorktown. So you have Washington coming from the north, you have Greene coming from the south, and they are able to trap Cornwallis in 1781. And on October 19, 1781, the Declaration of Independence basically gets to breathe a huge sigh of relief, and it goes from being a death warrant to an actual declaration when Lord Charles Cornwallis surrenders to George Washington at Yorktown. Cornwallis is so bitter that these American rebel scum have won that he refuses to go out and actually meet Washington. He hides and sends out his officer to do it, and Washington, of course, receives his sword, but not in a proper way. And this is the end. This is the end of fighting in the American Revolution. The British next year declared that they really don't have the means to continue this fight, that it's kind of a waste of their time, and they're going to redirect their efforts to a new colony where they will send their prisoners, Australia. In 1783, the Treaty of Paris is signed, with Jefferson, John Jay, and Franklin agreeing in Paris with the British to end the war, and America becomes independent and gains access to those Ohio River Valley frontier areas that they had wanted. The Declaration of Independence has now created a new independent country with a new government. The Continental Congress will be assembled based on the Articles of Confederation. That will prove to be too weak, and by 1787, America will clamor for a new document to govern them, and that will be the creations of a Constitution, which is backed up by the Bill of Rights. And by 1789, the man who led the American army through thick and thin will become the first U.S. president when George Washington is sworn in on April 30th, 1789, in New York, and eventually the capital will be named after this great commander. So there you go. That is a basic overview of the Declaration of Independence, the American death warrant that became the most important document in U.S. history. I hope you really enjoyed me discussing it and sharing that information with you. If you did, consider liking and subscribing and becoming a friendly neighborhood historian. It's as easy as that. Follow us on the social medias, and if you want to, donate or join the platform. We will be having members-only lives, members-only chats, special videos, exclusive content, early releases, all of that. We also have that on Patreon, so you can follow me there and join. So yes, what about the Federalist Papers and the Constitution? I did the Declaration of Independence because it's July 4th. Federalist paper, I'll do them really quick. Federalist paper, the Constitution, there's a big debate about how strong the federal government should be. People are opposed to the Constitution because they think it gives the government too much power. And James Madison, Alexander Hamilton, and John Jay, who will become the first Supreme Court Chief Justice, basically write a series of essays called the Federalist Papers that basically convince people convinces people to embrace the Constitution. And Madison, in order to keep his own side with men like George Mason and Thomas Jefferson happy, writes the Bill of Rights as an addendum, 10 amendments to the Constitution that guarantee individual and states' rights. So there you go. There's a quick explanation in less than a minute. There you go. Can you discuss American Army defeat under Arthur St. Clair to the Native Americans in Northwest? When was that? Is that during the American Revolution? There was fighting. Roger Clark and Matt Anthony Wayne, and they did a lot of fighting mainly against Native Americans in that area, who were sympathetic to the British. I believe Chief Pontiac was sympathetic to the British up in Michigan. The Americans do try to attack Canada, and it fails. The American Revolution is basically a trial and error process. America is a holy land. Prove me wrong. Jeez. So I hope you enjoyed what I said, and obviously I'm an American, so I'm biased. I like America. It's obviously an amazing place in many ways, but that doesn't take away from the incredible stories and histories of other countries. I don't know about American exceptionalism. What makes America unique is what I was saying earlier, the formation on ideas rather than on a particular blood type, because you have Angloids rebelling against other Angloids. So what's going to make one group of Angloids unique from the other group of Angloids? Angloids referring to people from England, but also British. You have one group of British colonists rebelling against their British overlords, so they're British. So what's going to make them different? It's obviously going to be the principles on which they are founded. That's what the founders choose when they sign the Declaration. So 1791. Interesting. So basically, they basically push into these Indian territories that they weren't allowed in, and a lot of the time they were defeated. But it wasn't until about 1815 that the Americans are actually able to subdue much of the land in the Midwest that the natives continue to contest. I mean, you have Tecumseh, you have Tippecanoe in 1811, different stuff like that. So yeah. Anyways, if you enjoyed what you listened to, consider liking and subscribing, and we'll go for another 10 minutes. I'll answer your questions about history and social studies. But really, thank you everyone for joining us. Britain has some pretty impressive history. Can you get more into that? I have an entire series on the British monarchs. I have tier rankings, 3 full-length, long-length videos where I tier rank the British monarchs, the Russian czars, and the U.S. presidents. You can go look at that for more. Basically, yeah, Britain does have a fascinating history. And the British history includes Scotland, and it includes Wales. The reason it's called Britain is because the ancient Romans called it Britannia. And the Britons were one Celtic tribe that they would constantly fight in that area. Yep, basically. Ambushes were very common with the Native Americans, and that's what happened with Wabash. Richard I was a great commander and did an incredible job fighting the Crusades undermanned against the greatest general of that time, Saladin, but he was not a great king. Sorry, Tarka. Britain is, I'm pretty impressed. History. I'm just looking through the chat. If you have a question, drop it in the chat. I'll be happy to answer it about this or anything else. First capital is Philadelphia or New York City. It's a tough one. First, you could say Philadelphia. I would say Philadelphia. Then it goes to New York, is where the first president is sworn in, and then they move it to Philadelphia by Washington's second term, and then of course Charles L'Enfant helps define the Washington D.C., which becomes the capital in 1800. Thank you, Angel. I really appreciate it. Hello, Mega Turk. Ireland was part of Britain too for the most of history. Ireland is not considered Britain. It's not on the same island. It's part of the United Kingdom for a significant part of the land. It's part of the British Empire, to be sure. I did a video recently and got some flack for it, where I said that the Irish have suffered more under British colonialism than anyone else. And of course, I wasn't trying to denigrate the horrible experiences of slaves, Africans, and Indians, but I was trying to point out that Native Americans and Indians from India. But Ireland was colonized by the British in the 12th century, and that continued, and the Scottish did it too. And that continued until the early 20th century, and even until the 1990s, you could argue. So, yeah. Sky's the limit, don't do that. You have too much to live for. Have you ever been to any Revolutionary War battlefields? No, I need to get over to the East Coast more. In the sense of I'm lazy when it comes to where I go in the country. I want to go to those battlefields more. If I go to the East, if I go to and do a tour of the 13 colonies, not the 13 colonies, but if I do a tour of Revolutionary battlefields, I'm going to try to do all of them at once, especially maybe one in the North, one in the South. I do travel. Who says it's far traveling for me? to go to Philadelphia, to go to New York. Y'all don't know where I am. Anyways, a duel is crazy. I would ask for fisticuffs. Fisticuffs replaced duels because duels were almost always illegal. You don't know where I live. To give countries their freedom back after what I think, I don't know. Is it? What I think is important is they are the first country to give countries their freedom back after conquest. What do you mean by that, Captain Crunch? Are you referring to the British or to the Americans? Tarka, we're not going to duel about that. I always like a good debate if you want to go live with me, but yeah. Right, sure, Hearts. So anyone have questions about history, social studies, and the like? Okay, Corzo had a good question. Let me see here. I'm good. Har, I hope you're doing well. Thank you for subbing. I really appreciate that, Scott. Sky's limit. France still owns Haiti, kind of. Tell us about the Freemasonic connection. Some of the founding fathers were Masons. That's about it. Long live President Jefferson. He was a great president, to be sure. Yeah, it's always up close, Doctor Who, what, where. So when you look at this delivery bell, it's always up close. So I know it's not that big. I read some left to Mexico because they own people were hating on them. Some left Mexico because their own people were hating on them. I've heard that before. Let me see here. Most was young when they did this. Yes, Jefferson was only 33 when he wrote the Declaration of Independence. But he was 57 when he became president. Or he was not 57. He was 57. So we just forget about slavery. No. Obviously, the founding fathers have a lot to answer for when it comes to slavery because many of them owned slaves and many of them fought for liberty, justice, and freedom, but didn't give those rights to women. Abigail Adams insisted that women have a voice in politics, and her husband loved her but often disagreed with her. Jefferson owned slaves and refused to free them. He had relations with some of his slaves and had children with some of them. Washington owned slaves and only freed them after his wife died. Madison owned slaves. The guy who helped Dolly Madison save the portrait of George Washington and set the White House for dinner for the British before they burned the White House during the War of 1812 was a slave. Slavery was a sin made by all peoples in the country. We fought a war and lost thousands of men to ensure rights for all men. Yes, Corzo, but there were many countries that didn't have to have a war to fight against slavery, to be fair. From Jaipur, thank you for joining us. Max, hello. Hi, M from Scott. So we got people from Scotland, we've got people from the United States, we've got people from India, we've got people from all over the world. It's always great to see everybody. Can you make any argument for why Woodrow Wilson is not an F-tier president besides coincidences and war and failed attempts? He won a world war. There you go. That's enough for me. What would you do if socialism came to California? Isn't California commonly called the People's Republic of California? And what do I care about California? It's beautiful. It's incredible. California history is pretty interesting, but beyond that. Were immigrants considered equal? It's interesting, Steve, because a lot of immigrants, when they first came to the United States, were not considered even what we consider to be white. And I don't want to say white is a term for equal, but for a lot of people in the 19th and 18th centuries, it was, unfortunately. A lot of immigrants were not considered to be pure-blooded Americans the way we would think of Irish and Italians as white or European. The term Caucasian, white, European, American has extended to add in people of different ethnicities over time who weren't originally thought to be that way. Italians, Polish, Greeks, even the Jews are all considered kind of under that idea of umbrella of Caucasian American when they weren't originally. And what's fascinating is for the Hispanics, it's been the opposite. Hispanics were considered white when they first started coming into the United States in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. Is it true the White House was painted white because of the fire? No. It was. Some people call it the White House. It was Teddy Roosevelt who really gave it that name in the 20th century. It was when they repainted it. Been a while. Arvan, great to see you. What about the Japanese conquest of Asia? When? You mean the two Sino-Japanese wars when they took over Korea? The Japanese got pretty far in China, and a lot of people don't talk about it. And I think that what I call the Third World War, the Second World War, really begins in 1937 at the Marco Polo Bridge incident. So, there you go. If Samuel Debs or Henry Wallace won the presidency, you mean Eugene Debs? How much better the U.S. would be? I don't know what they would have done. I don't know how much support they would have had being socialists right after the rise of the Soviet Union and the beginning of a Cold War. It would have been really hard for either of them to really get much traction. Yeah, Aoife, it's one of these things where it wasn't white, and I shouldn't say white as in white is the standard. It wasn't even the standard for them. For them, what we consider white as the majority or privileged class, which I don't even like normally saying in U.S. history, throughout his history, it's definitely been the case. But to say that white people have always had, no, there's been tons of white people, white Europeans who have suffered greatly in this country and be discriminated because they're not American enough. So you have English, Angloid groups, the British, English, Scottish, Welsh, some Irish. Then you've got a proliferation of German immigrants, and the Germans are mistreated. They don't speak, a lot of them don't speak English, but the Germans and the English have some similar history. The Germanic language developed, English is a Germanic language, so there's huge amounts of German immigrants at the beginning of the 19th century. Then the Irish come in the middle of the 19th century. Then the Italians, Greeks, and Jews at the end of the 19th century, and it's concentric circles. It's one group oppressing another group of immigrants. And these groups of people were all white, but they didn't think of them as white. They thought, are they American or not? A huge objection towards the Irish, the Poles, and even many Germans and Italians was that they were Catholic. So it was WASP. It wasn't just white, but it was Anglo-Saxon and Protestant. So maybe that's a little bit better, the WASP definition, even though French, Germans, and Italian immigrants were all white, basically. They're all Europeans, Caucasian. That wasn't the litmus test for all. But the litmus test was, are you ASP? Are you ASP? Are you Anglo-Saxon Protestants? So that was a big issue. And the Irish are not Anglo-Saxons. So there's an issue there. I am a history sponge. I do not have Asperger's, but I appreciate the compliment. Woodrow Wilson coincidentally being president during a war and then screwing up his chances by micromanaging doesn't mean he won a world war. I'm sorry, but James K. Polk had very little to do with the managing of the Mexican-American War, and he won that war. The president is the president during a winning war. He won the war. I'm not a huge FDR fan, but FDR won the World War, won the Third World War, and Harry Truman. I did a video. I forgot to use chapstick, and that's why I'm a little bit chappy. I'm a little bit dry today. It's the dry season. It's really hot. But yeah. I remember I did one video, and everyone was complaining that my lips were too chapped. And then I did another video later that day explaining how chapstick was made. I saw my opportunity and I took it. The Anglo-Sikh War. Yeah, the British fought the Sikhs several different times in India. I'm trying to remember when they were exactly. It was probably the East India Company. No, it's okay, Andy. No need to be sorry. And don't leave. We're happy you're here. How did Pinocchio figure out he was made out of wood? His hand caught fire. Jeez. That's tough. That's a ooch moment right there. Italians and Irish fought with each other back then, even though they had so much in common. Yes, the Irish were oppressed by the Germans. Then the Irish, when they went out west to help build the railroads, oppressed Chinese immigrants, and the Irish ran neighborhoods in New York and were known for fighting with the Italians. So you have Irish and Italian gangs. Al Capone targeted George Bugs Moran, who ran another Irish gang in Chicago. And many of these people, the immigrant groups, centered around the cities. It's only when they became more affluent that they tended to move out into the suburbs. Many of these, it's interesting, the demographic and political changes of these groups throughout the 20th century. Many of them, when they first came to the United States, lived in squalor, terrible conditions, worked in factories, but made more money and had a better life, many of them thought, than they would have had in Europe. Some were just too stubborn to go back. Some did go back. But developed a new life for themselves, and as they became more wealthy, they tended to become more Republican, and they tended to move out towards the suburbs. So there you go. Thoughts of Germany's chances of winning World War II if they had a land invasion of Britain. I call it World War III, but I understand where you're going, Kurgan. Napoleon knew not to attack. That's why Churchill in his famous speech remarks about Napoleon, because the invasion of Britain as an island has always been really difficult. The Romans had to do it twice. The French did it you could argue that William the Conqueror was a great general, but he was really only successful because it wasn't Britain, it was England. He was able to defeat an English army already war-weary from defeating the Norwegians under Harold Hardrada. Wales and Scotland weren't even controlled at this time. So, would the Soviets have retained their territory if not for Gorbachev? Also, was Gorbachev CIA's plan? No to the second one. I don't know how far. I think the Soviet Union was in so much decline that Gorbachev was just trying to change course. He thought he was saving the revolution, and he was dooming them to collapse. By democratizing the Soviet Union, he led to their collapse. You shouldn't give false credit to a racist progressive who hurt the United States for decades. I'm sorry, but many American presidents were racist. That doesn't automatically mean you're a bad president. It doesn't mean a great thing about you. I don't like people twisting the narrative that Wilson was some incredibly great president. I've talked about how Woodrow Wilson wasn't that great, but yeah. Can you shout me out? Yeah, Libby, there you go. I am from the family of the Mughal king Bahadur Shah. Oh, Bahadur Shah, who Aurangzeb's son, the son of Aurangzeb. I watched the movie Napoleon. I kind of liked it. I still need to see that. I like Ridley Scott. And I heard that movie wasn't that great, but I loved Napoleon. Maybe it's a history nerd movie where if you know the history, you really get into it. Thank you, Kurgan. You're very knowledgeable, too. I'm glad that you're here. What good did Woodrow Wilson do for the United States compared to bad he did? Winning a world war, establishing America's dominance in Europe, siding with the right side in that world war, making a bunch of countries in Europe economically dependent on the United States. I think Woodrow Wilson, despite all of his failures, kind of is part of the reason America became a world power. Although you could say that I would give more credit to Theodore Roosevelt for that, but Wilson really cemented it. I think that if the U.S. had joined the League of Nations, there wouldn't have been another world war. I do believe that. That doesn't take away from a lot of his failed policies, his micromanaging of a war, but I think Wilson had a democratic vision for Europe that actually would work if it wasn't so imperialized. So there you go. So my point is, Churchill was racist, but he was very competent as well. There you go. So Churchill, I would say Churchill's a better leader than Woodrow Wilson. Woodrow Wilson had some interesting ideas. He made some mistakes. But he also did successfully help carve out a space for the United States as one of the leading powers in the world. That's true. He kind of took advantage of a good situation he already had, but he didn't fail to do it. And he picked the right side in the war. I think those things help out his case. Dred Scott versus Ferguson? You mean Plessy versus Ferguson? Yes, I know. Doctor Who, where Wilson will always bear the scar of playing the first movie, Birth of a Nation, at the White House. I'm not a huge Woodrow Wilson fan, but I don't put him on the top pedestal of great American presidents. And I don't say that he's fully trash either. There's a reason a lot of historians really like Woodrow Wilson and FDR. I think they're both highly overrated. The fact that I just don't throw them into the F tier is what Harst doesn't like. What do you think about Middle East situation? Who do you think is at fault for escalation? The United States did a lot of damage by letting the Shah fall in '79, overthrowing Mohammed Mossadegh, allowing Syria to fall under the Assads, overthrowing Saddam Hussein, overthrowing the Taliban, then to replace them with the Taliban. Major L there. And so yeah, there's been, the United States through inaction and through overreaction has done a lot of destabilizing in that area. I think that if that area was left to its own devices and there was no Israel, the radical Muslims, though, would be fighting and killing each other, unfortunately. You got Shia versus Sunni. And what is happening now is all of the Sunni states are turning against Iran, which is why Syria and Saudi Arabia are open to joining the Abraham Accords. You are sniffling something to say that Woodrow Wilson is not in the F tier. I'm saying he's a high C tier president. The racism, the birth of a nation, the segregation of the federal government, those are horrible things. He doesn't get a pass on that. And he was far more actively racist than other American presidents. It's not that you're a racist. Unfortunately, so many leaders in the Western canon have been racist. It's how actively racist you were that gets him a lot of bad rap. I mean, Johnson was a horrible racist in his own private life, but gets a lot of credit for the Civil Rights Act. So, but it's a difficult thing to do. But Wilson established America's predominance. And I think that was pretty big. And I think getting involved in the war was a good thing. I just think he should have done it in 1914. Let me see here. Let me see. Why did the British leave India? The United States put pressure on Britain to get rid of its empire. I did a live stream lecture on this about 3 weeks ago. Go check that out, Sawai. But basically, the British put pressure on the United States put pressure on Britain to decolonize, and India had been clamoring peacefully for civil rights ever since Gandhi took control of the Indian National Congress, and so they gave them their freedom. And they divided them between Pakistani Muslims in both West and East Pakistan, which became Bangladesh, and India was obviously the Hindu majority area. You also cannot double down on what happened in World War I by just describing him winning that war as evidence he did something good. I would say any president who wins a war during his presidency gets a bonus. McKinley wasn't fully responsible for George Dewey's victories in the Philippines, and he wasn't fully responsible for San Juan Hill, but he gets the credit for winning the Mexican-American War. I'm giving Wilson the credit he is due. I'm not a huge Woodrow Wilson fan. Britain also looted Africa. when you, yes, looted and developed, exploited and educated, tore down, discriminated, and enriched. There are tensions in colonization. It's not that simple. The dividing up of African colonies by the Europeans, drawing lines around them for their own sake without African input, was a horrible decision. Which democracy do you like? Indian model democracy or American model democracy? What are the advantages and disadvantages? I don't know how Indian democracy works, Amit. It's interesting. India has become very nationalistic in the last few years under Modi. He's very active right now. I've been reading about him. You just said he did good things like winning World War I and joining the war. You can't describe one reason. You said as another reason why. For what? He joined a war. He joined on the right side of it. He won that war. If he had done it sooner, the war would have been over sooner. Russia wouldn't have fallen into communism. Wilson could have done a lot better by joining the war in 1914, like Teddy Roosevelt wanted him to do. So I think that Roosevelt was the superior president, and if anyone, and I think he gives the bulk of the credit for putting America on that superpower road, Wilson just kind of finished it. And I think he gets credit for that. I think if the United States had joined the League of Nations, they probably would have kept the Nazis in check. I do believe that. Belgian Congo under Leopold was a sad situation, to say the least. Yes, it was horrible what the Belgians did. It was so bad that the international community stepped in and deprived him of control of that area. Thank you, Guns. I really appreciate that. Interesting. Rana Safi, thank you. I'm having a great Sunday, Cedric. I'm so glad you're here. Your thoughts on Israel and Palestine issue? I'm a historian. I look at it from a historical perspective. Both sides have done horrible things to the other side, and both sides have lost opportunities. The Palestinians have lost many opportunities over the last 7.5 decades to actually get their own state. If they wanted their own state, if they wanted a two-state solution, if they wanted peace with the Israelis, they have a bad way of demonstrating it. Much of the Middle East has screwed over the Palestinians, not just the Israelis. The Israelis have done it through war. The other Arab states have done it through negligence and lack of intervention. And Israel is now doing it now by their invasion of the West Bank and in Gaza. Stop the war. Stopping the war makes sense, and then you can figure out a two-state solution. So there you go. And I'm using my history to inform what I believe now. Yeah, I mean, people ask me about the Big Beautiful Bill. I have a video here and on TikTok where I explain what's in the Big Beautiful Bill and what it actually is. I misspoke when I said there's no taxes on tips. There's a deduction of up to $25,000 the salary of up to $25,000 of income on tips that lasts for 4 years, and maybe they can make it permanent. And there's other legislation to make no taxes on tips. That's my only mistake in that video. But I do describe what the Big Beautiful Bill or Big Ugly Bill or Big Trump Spending Bill, whatever you want to call it. I call it the Trump Mega Bill usually does. Have you ever watched an Indian Bollywood film? I should, though. I really, really should. And I really do love history. Both sides isn't fair when there is a power imbalance. No, SM, I don't agree. There is a power imbalance. And part of the problem is the continual refusal by Arabs and Palestinians to accept offers for a two-state solution. Clinton gave them 95% of what they wanted. Ben-Gurion was willing to give them 87% of the land. They didn't take it. And I'm not saying they deserve what they get. That's awful. I don't believe that. I think the war should stop immediately. But I'm saying the Palestinians have had a lot of problems. I wouldn't say dug their own graves. I wouldn't say that's awful. But they have made things a lot harder for that. Yeah. History is the farthest thing from friendly. It's brutal. I dare you to prove me wrong. History is extremely brutal, which is why you need someone to deliver it to you in a friendly, neighborly manner. I do history here with a positive lens, trying to talk about the good, but also talk about the bad and be realistic about history. When I call it friendly neighborhood history, partly because of Spider-Man, because he's my favorite superhero, but also because I believe that people should learn history in a manner that is accessible to them. And being accessible means being friendly. I'm not going to be mean about history. I'm not going to be brutal. So yeah, that's a hot take. Two-state solution. Did Israel exist before 1948 just because they've something in their book? What if I gave you home because... What's your, I don't know what you mean, Imran. The Jewish state has existed before then, as has the Palestinian state. Why is it one or the other? Why can't it be two states? Yeah. Dirty Bomb? I don't know. No, Adifa, I do not. Yes, Dr. Who, What, Where. I know what I said. That's not what I meant, obviously. Their refusal to take certain deals put them in a difficult position. The refusal of other Arab states to help them has also put them in a difficult position. And Israel, obviously, warmongering against them has put them in a difficult position. But do you believe that there are parts of history, including technology and ancestry, that's being hidden from the population? There could be. This is why we continue to study history. This is why we study anthropology, to find out as much as we can. There's history that is hidden. That's why you uncover things. That's why you have archaeology. That's why you have museums and all of that stuff. One people massacred and ethnically cleansed in 1948. I mean, I understand where you're coming from with that, but that's not true. They referred to the Israelis living there as Palestinians in 1948. The Arab-Israeli War, not the Palestinian-Israel War, in 1948, led to the dispossession and the loss of land of hundreds of thousands of Palestinians. It also led to hundreds of thousands of Jews being kicked out of Arab countries and being forced to go to Israel. So there is that dispossession. That definitely did happen. Every single two-state solution offered to the Palestinians was refused. And Jordan was supposed to be their state, and the Hashemites screwed them over by buying that land from the British. That's all true. And yes, what the Israelis did in that war is obviously awful. I have a hard time. That's like saying the Union Army massacred the Confederates to win the Civil War. I don't think that's fair. I'm saying that I don't think that's fully fair to say that just because you're fighting a war and the other side gets destroyed in the war means you massacred and ethnically cleansed them. Did we ethnically cleanse the Germans by bombing Dresden and all the other cities we bombed? I don't like that language for several different reasons. So, anyways, why did the Ottoman Empire end? The British actually, again, had their fingers in too many pies, just like what I was just talking about with Jordan. The British basically allowed Arabs to undermine them and defeated them in the Great War. And then Britain and France redrew the lines like they did in Africa and created the modern Middle Eastern states. I have a live stream lecture on this from a couple of weeks ago where I talk about exactly why how the Middle East was created in the 20th century. Yeah, Arvend, it was an absolute betrayal. And the Hashemites wanted that land, and the Hashemites have done nothing but hurt the Palestinians. Done in other Arab states and a lot of Arab states. So, Mikhail, one of the reasons, so in Egypt, for instance, when Israel was bombing Rafah, the Egyptians closed their border. The reason they did this is because they were worried about the Muslim Brotherhood and the Palestinians working together to overthrow the Egyptian government. So there you go. There's this fear. There's a lot of Arab states have apartheids against the Palestinians, just like Israel does. The Lebanese do not grant them full citizenship. The Jordanians do not grant them full citizenship, and so on. Let me see. So Woodrow Wilson almost messed up his conscience and never earned anything in his position, and you think that he is better than Nixon. What are you sorry? I'm sorry. I'm going to say that winning a world war is better than Watergate. Sorry. There you go. And SM, I know you don't agree with me, but I'm not saying anything that's not true. I'm good, Peyton. I hope you're good. I'm going to wrap up in a minute, but let me see if I missed anything. You literally look like Roman Bridger from Scream 3. Is Roman Bridger good looking? Because I'll take it if he is. Yeah. Let me see here. Palestinians are too, but so are the Israelis running into the West Bank and attacking Palestinian land. If you want the West Bank to be the Palestinian state, which it looks like it will be, the Israelis have to get out of there. Yes, SM. As I think it was Plato who said, when the debate is over, the loser resorts to ad hominems. Don't delete the message. Do you know anything about Kashmir issue? The Kashmir is one of two areas. I forget the name of the other. This is interesting to talk about this on the birthday of the Dalai Lama, with Tibet being taken by China and the Indians wanting it free. Kashmir is a disputed area between Pakistan and India. Part of it is controlled by India, part of it is controlled by Pakistan, and there was a war in the 1970s to determine who controls it. It led to a lot of political upheaval, but it's basically contested because when the British divided Pakistan from India, again, the British, I love the British. I know Harry's going to be watching this later and wondering why I wasn't on time, but also why we were hours early. He probably doesn't want to go because it's about America anyways. But the truth of the matter is the British divided that area based off religion, just like they did in Palestine. And the Muslims took Pakistan, and the non-Muslims, the Hindus, took India. The Indian subcontinent before then referred to Pakistan and India together, and Kashmir was the area in the middle. I think Nixon got framed for Watergate. I don't think he got framed. I think he could have done a lot better. I think Nixon was a good president outside of Watergate. And it wasn't just doing Watergate, it was the cover-up of Watergate. He did not win the World War. He didn't earn a win. He actually hurt his chances of helping. I know that he didn't help on certain occasions, but Lincoln made mistakes in the Civil War. Look at George Washington and what happened at New York. Would we say George Washington lost the American Revolution? I don't think so. How often do you live stream? I stream every Friday and Saturday here for a Q&A at 6 Eastern, and then Sundays at 4. I do my live stream like I'm doing it earlier today, and then I stream on Instagram every Friday at 7 Eastern. You could credible blame Wilson for the Cold War and drug war. It is true. Wilson is indirectly responsible for some of this stuff. Tell me about the Ottoman Empire. Obviously, Osman was a Turk who united all the Turks and was able to eventually defeat the Mamelukes and destroy the Byzantines. In 1453, they destroyed the Byzantines. Kashmir belongs to Pakistan. Why? Why does it belong to Pakistan and not India? I really don't know. I'm actually asking that legitimately. As a Westerner, my knee jerk is to favor India, but I don't know who Kashmir belongs to. Just like I don't definitively know who that land, whatever you want to call it, the Holy Land belongs to. Let's say. Oh, Tay, good to see you. What they all originated from, that island over years ago. The Palestinians and Israelis, we don't think so. They were both planted there. That's true, Tay. Very true. Hi, Katrina. Any info on Roswell crash? Began the UFO scare, 1947. The government kind of covers it up. It's led to a lot of questions. Why do we have Nixon sympathizers? Nixon did some good stuff. To be sure, he ended the Vietnam War with a W after everything that had happened. Believe it or not, the United States technically won the Vietnam War. It was only because Nixon wasn't in charge that Saigon fell. So, Horace, I'll say this. If Wilson had gotten in the war sooner, the Soviet Union wouldn't have been created. So that's a loss on Wilson's part. And Nixon, if he had still been president, Vietnam would not have, there would be a South Vietnam that would be free to this day. Do you think Reza Pahlavi will get to return to Iran to the new Shah? No. The United States has totally pulled any idea of regime change in Iran off the menu. It was on the menu briefly when they thought the Israelis might kill Khamenei, but that wasn't going to happen. Arvind, yeah, I've done videos on the Ottomans. I love the Ottomans. I can't summarize them all in 5 seconds. I mean, the beauty and splendor of it they did in Istanbul, Suleiman the Magnificent, the conquest of the artistic and cultural home of the world, the greatest empire in the world at the time, the most underrated empire in history, the conquest of the Balkans. These guys were pretty indefatigable in the 15th and 16th centuries. Does the USA have any hand in not resolving the Kashmir issue? Hope a transparent answer from you. I don't know the hand the U.S. is. I don't know what the U.S. official policy on Kashmir is. And I'm an American, so like all Americans, I don't care what the U.S.'s official policy is. Let me see here. Hi, from Kenya. Thank you for joining us. Tomorrow, in our country, we are celebrating a day called Saba Saba. Kenya is going through a lot right now, Austin. I hope you're safe. But 7 years. This is when we threw the dictator called Moi. Yeah, I've heard about Moi. Was Jimmy Carter the most inconsequential president? He was one of the worst. One of the greatest men outside the presidency. One of the most ill-equipped presidents. World War II, the war that was fought. Yeah, yes, the dictionary is wrong, Steve. There are 3 world wars. I know historians disagree, but yeah. Well, Lincoln and Washington did also a lot more. That's true. That's why they're A-tier, S-tier presidents, and he's a C-tier. He wins a war. He doesn't get much more than that. FDR was a better president than Woodrow Wilson, but was probably equally as racist. So, what was the Third World War? 7 years wars, I said at the beginning, is the First World War, then the Great War will be World War II, and the war we all know is World War II, is World War III. I'm from the United States, Dinesh. Okay. Thank you for joining us. I've gone 20 minutes extra just to get lovely interactions and questions with you. So you got a bonus 30 minutes of Q&A after the 50-minute presentation. Thank you for joining us from India and from all over the world, people from Kenya. Happy Saba Saba. Sorry, Patrick Kirk, I got to get going. And besides, I went over just for you guys to answer your questions about stuff. I hope you guys all have a really great week. I'll see you again on Friday when we live stream, but I've got long-form content dropping every Monday and Friday here on the channel. And of course, I'm on TikTok, and I've got shorts every day on both platforms. This was indeed a lot of fun. I'm a Kashmiri guy. When baby GDP wants to win elections, they'll use Kashmir. Same for Pakistan. Yep, sounds about right. It's the nationalist pride. I'm sorry that Kashmir has been so used. I hope you are safe, and I hope that resolves itself soon. I don't know who actually... I wonder SM's point about why Kashmir belongs to Pakistan or why it belongs to India. Maybe it should be its own country. I mean, they did it with Bangladesh. So there you go. Woodrow Wilson did not win a war. You can't minimize his issues. He won a war. He was in charge of a country that won a war. That's Lloyd George won a war. He won a war. There you go. And yes, how much he was involved in that is another discussion. Would you like to become the president of America? Oh my God, no, God no. I don't even want. I don't even want to be the president of this channel. So yeah, Costa Rica. We got people from all over the world. Thank you all for joining us. Tay from New Zealand. Hars from the great good old United States. Yes, the Kashmiris should have their own state. I think I can get behind that, Imran. I don't know what. Oh, sorry, Yapper. Sorry, you got to report me. Or you could just do your time more effectively doing something like reading a book or listening to classical music. Take care. Have a great week, everyone. And remember, love history. Bye-bye now.